My name is Catherine Wells, and at 34 years old, I never imagined my own family would abandon me during the darkest period of my life. When I filed for divorce from my husband of 8 years, Daniel, every single member of my family took his side without even asking why our marriage had fallen apart. They painted me as the villain who was destroying a good man's life, while Daniel played the role of the heartbroken husband who just wanted to save our relationship. What they didn't know was what I had discovered about Daniel's secret life and why I couldn't stay married to him another day. The truth would eventually come out in the most devastating way possible. My marriage to Daniel had seemed perfect from the outside. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and had what everyone called a fairy tale wedding. Daniel was charming, successful in his career as a financial advisor, and seemed to adore me completely. He was the kind of husband who brought me flowers for no reason, remembered important dates, and made grand romantic gestures that impressed everyone around us. My family absolutely loved him, often commenting that I was lucky to have found such a devoted partner. For the first 5 years of our marriage, I believed I was living the dream life I had always wanted. The cracks in our perfect marriage began to show in subtle ways that I initially dismissed as normal relationship challenges. Daniel became increasingly controlling about our finances, insisting on managing all our accounts and investments himself. When I questioned certain expenses or asked to see bank statements, he would become defensive and accuse me of not trusting his professional expertise. He started working longer hours and taking frequent business trips that seemed to have vague purposes and unclear outcomes. Most concerning was how he began isolating me from friends and family, always finding reasons why we couldn't attend social events or why certain people were bad influences on our relationship. The discovery that changed everything happened completely by accident 8 months ago. Daniel had left his laptop open while taking a shower, and a message notification popped up on the screen. The preview showed enough text to make me realize it was not a business communication, but rather an intimate message from someone named Lisa expressing excitement about their upcoming weekend together. My hands were shaking as I opened his email account and began reading months of correspondence that revealed Daniel had been living a completely different life than the one he shared with me. The man I thought I knew was a complete fiction. What I found in Daniel's emails and text messages was a web of deception so elaborate that I struggled to process how he had maintained it for so long. He had been having affairs with multiple women over the past 3 years, including some who worked at his firm and others he had met through dating apps. The messages revealed a pattern of lies about business trips that were actually romantic getaways, fake work events that were covers for dates, and elaborate stories about client meetings that never existed. Each relationship seemed to follow the same pattern of intense romantic pursuit, followed by promises about leaving his wife when the time was right. But the infidelity was only the beginning of what I discovered about Daniel's deception. Further investigation into his computer and phone revealed that he had been systematically stealing money from our joint accounts to fund his affairs and maintain the expensive lifestyle he was living behind my back. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, and vacation expenses that I had never seen were being paid for with money from accounts I thought were being saved for our future together. The financial betrayal was almost more devastating than the emotional one because it represented years of planning and deliberate theft from our marriage. The most shocking discovery was evidence that Daniel had been manipulating our social circle and my family for years, positioning himself as the perfect husband while subtly undermining my reputation and credibility. I found drafts of emails where he practiced what to say to my parents about my supposed mood swings and unreasonable behavior. There were text messages to mutual friends expressing concern about my mental health and asking them to watch for signs that I was becoming unstable. He had been building a narrative that would protect him if our marriage fell apart, painting me as the problem while presenting himself as the long-suffering, devoted spouse. When I confronted Daniel with the evidence I had found, his reaction confirmed everything I had learned about his manipulative nature. Instead of showing remorse or trying to explain his behavior, he immediately went on the offensive, accusing me of violating his privacy and trying to destroy his reputation with lies and fabricated evidence. He claimed that I was having a mental breakdown and that my accusations were the product of paranoid delusions brought on by stress and jealousy. His performance was so convincing that I almost started to doubt my own perceptions until I remembered the concrete evidence I had seen with my own eyes. The divorce proceedings began immediately after our confrontation, and Daniel's strategy became clear within days. He had already been laying the groundwork for months, positioning himself as the victim of an unstable wife who was making false accusations to hurt him in the divorce. He hired an expensive lawyer and began a campaign to discredit me with everyone who mattered in our social circle. My own family received calls from Daniel expressing his heartbreak about my decision to end the marriage and asking for their help in convincing me to seek professional help for my supposed mental health issues. My family's reaction to the divorce was swift and devastating. Without asking for my side of the story or showing any curiosity about why I would want to leave what appeared to be a happy marriage, they immediately rallied around Daniel and began pressuring me to reconsider my decision. My parents invited him to family dinners while excluding me. My siblings called to lecture me about the importance of working through marital problems. And my extended family made it clear that they considered me selfish and destructive for abandoning such a wonderful husband. The isolation was complete and immediate. The most painful part of my family's betrayal was how readily they accepted Daniel's version of events without ever asking for mine. When I tried to explain that there were serious problems in our marriage that they didn't understand, they dismissed my concerns as temporary difficulties that could be resolved with counseling and commitment. When I hinted that Daniel had been unfaithful, they accused me of making excuses for my own unwillingness to work on the relationship. Their trust in Daniel was so complete that they couldn't even consider the possibility that he might be deceiving them the same way he had deceived me. Daniel played his role perfectly during this period, showing up to family events, looking devastated, and asking everyone to pray that I would come to my senses and return to our marriage. He brought flowers to my mother on her birthday and helped my father with home repairs, positioning himself as the son-in-law who was more dedicated to the family than their own daughter. He shared carefully edited stories about our relationship problems, always framing himself as the patient, loving husband who was trying everything possible to save our marriage despite my unreasonable demands and erratic behavior. The legal battle was brutal, with Daniel using his financial resources and social connections to make the divorce as difficult and expensive as possible for me. He contested everything, from property division to spousal support, claiming that my accusations of infidelity were false and that I was trying to steal assets I didn't deserve. His lawyer painted me as a gold digger who was fabricating stories to justify taking half of everything Daniel had worked hard to build during our marriage. The proceedings dragged on for months, draining my savings and emotional reserves, while Daniel appeared to thrive on the conflict and attention. Throughout this nightmare, my family continued to support Daniel and pressure me to abandon the divorce. They attended court hearings on his behalf, wrote character reference letters for his legal team, and made it clear that they considered me the villain in this situation. Holiday invitations went to Daniel instead of me. Family photos were taken with him included as if he were still part of the family. And conversations about family events always centered around how much everyone missed having him there. The message was clear. They had chosen him over their own daughter and sister. The breakthrough in my case came when Daniel's own arrogance and overconfidence led to his downfall. During one of his depositions, he was asked direct questions about his financial activities and whereabouts on specific dates. Under oath, and apparently believing he was too smart to be caught in lies, Daniel provided detailed answers that contradicted the evidence I had gathered about his affairs and financial misconduct. His stories about business tricks and client meetings created a timeline that could be verified through official records. And when my lawyer began investigating, the lies became impossible to maintain. The evidence that emerged during the legal discovery process was even more damaging than what I had initially found on Daniel's computer. Financial records subpoenaed from banks and credit card companies showed a clear pattern of money being diverted from our joint accounts to fund Daniel's secret lifestyle. Hotel records, airline reservations, and restaurant receipts created an undeniable timeline of deception that spanned years. Most importantly, several of the women Daniel had been involved with were located and agreed to provide testimony about their relationships with him, including evidence of his promises to leave me and his lies about our marriage being over. When this evidence was presented in court, Daniel's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. His lawyer tried to dismiss the financial irregularities as legitimate business expenses and characterized the affairs as consensual relationships that had no bearing on the divorce proceedings. But the sheer volume and consistency of the evidence made it impossible to deny that Daniel had been systematically lying about every aspect of his life for years. The judge was clearly unimpressed with Daniel's attempts to justify his behavior and began asking pointed questions about his credibility as a witness in his own case. The turning point came when my lawyer presented Daniel with specific emails and text messages that he had sent to various women, including detailed descriptions of how he planned to manipulate me and my family during the divorce proceedings. One particularly damaging message outlined his strategy of positioning me as mentally unstable, while presenting himself as the concerned husband who just wanted to help me get better. Another message laughed about how easily my family had been convinced to take his side and how useful their support would be in court proceedings. Daniel's reaction to having his own words read aloud in court was a mixture of rage and panic that revealed the true nature of his character. Gone was the charming, concerned husband who had been playing to the gallery for months. In his place was an angry, entitled man who couldn't believe his carefully planned deception was being exposed. His attempts to explain away the messages only made things worse, as each explanation revealed additional lies and contradictions. The court reporter captured every word of his meltdown, creating an official record of his true personality. The final blow to Daniel's credibility came when financial investigators uncovered evidence that he had been embezzling money from his clients' accounts to fund his personal lifestyle. The amounts were significant enough to constitute felony charges, and his employer had already begun their own investigation that would likely result in his termination and criminal prosecution. This revelation explained how Daniel had been able to afford the expensive hotels, restaurants, and gifts that had funded his affairs without depleting our joint accounts as much as his spending should have required. When news of Daniel's financial crimes became public, my family's attitude changed overnight. The man they had defended and supported for months was suddenly revealed to be not just an unfaithful husband, but a criminal who had been stealing from vulnerable clients who trusted him with their life savings. The cognitive dissonance was too great for them to maintain their support, and one by one, They began reaching out to apologize for their treatment of me during the divorce proceedings. My mother was the first to call, her voice shaky with emotion as she tried to explain how Daniel had convinced them that I was having a mental breakdown and needed their help to see reality clearly. She described months of conversations where Daniel had expressed concern about my behavior and asked for their assistance in getting me professional help. His performance had been so convincing that they genuinely believed they were helping me by supporting him and pressuring me to return to the marriage. My father's apology was more difficult for him to deliver, as he had been particularly vocal in his support of Daniel and criticism of my decision to divorce. He admitted that Daniel's charm and apparent devotion had impressed him so much that he couldn't imagine any legitimate reason for me to leave the marriage. The revelation that Daniel had been systematically lying and stealing had shattered his faith in his own judgment about people's character, and he struggled to understand how he had been so thoroughly deceived. The criminal charges against Daniel were filed 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized, and the local newspaper coverage ensured that everyone in our community learned about his crimes. My siblings called to express their horror at having supported someone who was stealing from elderly clients, and my extended family began reaching out to apologize for their treatment of me during the divorce. The social rehabilitation was swift, but couldn't undo the months of isolation and betrayal I had experienced when I needed my family's support the most. Daniel was eventually sentenced to 4 years in prison for embezzlement and fraud, and his professional license was permanently revoked. The financial restitution he was required to pay to his victims left him bankrupt, and the expensive lawyer who had helped him during our divorce proceedings was no longer available for his criminal defense. The contrast between his appearance during our divorce and his appearance at his criminal sentencing was stark, showing how quickly this carefully maintained image had dissolved once the truth emerged. The women who had been involved with Daniel during our marriage also came forward with their own stories of manipulation and deception. Each relationship had followed the same pattern of intense romantic pursuit, promises about leaving his wife, and elaborate lies about his financial situation and professional success. Several of them had been financially exploited, having loaned him money or paid for expenses based on his false promises about upcoming windfalls and investment opportunities. His pattern of behavior revealed a man who was capable of sustained, elaborate deception with multiple victims simultaneously. My family's efforts to rebuild our relationship have been ongoing but complicated by the knowledge that they abandoned me when I needed them most. Their apologies are sincere, but they come with explanations and justifications that reveal how much they want to be forgiven without fully acknowledging the impact of their betrayal. They want to return to normal family relationships without addressing the fundamental trust issues that were created when they chose to believe Daniel over their own daughter and sister. The most valuable lesson from this experience has been learning to trust my own perceptions and judgment, even when everyone around me is telling me I'm wrong. Daniel's manipulation was so sophisticated that he was able to convince people who had known me my entire life that I was mentally unstable and untrustworthy. If I hadn't found concrete evidence of his deception, I might have eventually started believing his version of reality myself. The importance of maintaining independent verification and documentation in relationships became clear only after I had already suffered significant damage. 3 years after our divorce, I've rebuilt my life in ways that prioritize authenticity and genuine connection over impressive appearances. The friends who stood by me during the divorce have proven to be true allies, while the fair-weather friends who were swayed by Daniel's charm have revealed their superficial nature. My relationship with my family is slowly improving, but it will never return to the unconditional trust that existed before they chose to believe a manipulative stranger over their own flesh and blood. Daniel's imprisonment has brought a sense of justice, but it cannot undo the years of deception or repair the relationships that were damaged by his manipulation. The elderly clients he stole from will never fully recover their losses, and the women he deceived are still dealing with the emotional and financial aftermath of his crimes. His actions created ripple effects that extended far beyond our marriage, affecting dozens of people who trusted him with their money, hearts, or both. The irony is that my family's support of Daniel during our divorce actually helped expose the full extent of his criminality. His confidence in their backing made him careless about covering his tracks, and his belief that he could manipulate the legal system the same way he had manipulated our personal relationships led him to make statements under oath that could be easily disproven. If he had been more worried about scrutiny, he might have been more careful about his lies and possibly avoided criminal prosecution. My family chose his side in our divorce because they believed his carefully constructed image over the reality of who he actually was. Until they learned what he'd been hiding, they couldn't understand why I would leave what appeared to be a perfect marriage. The truth eventually vindicated my decision, but it came too late to prevent the isolation and betrayal I experienced when I needed their support most. Sometimes being right isn't as satisfying as it should be, especially when the cost of proving it includes losing the people you thought would always be on your side.